On the night of September 11, 2001, as New York City reeled from the deadliest attack in American history, another tragedy was unfolding in the shadows. Amid the chaos and confusion, a man named Henryk Siwiak was gunned down on a Brooklyn street. His murder, forever unsolved, was lost beneath the echoes of that fateful day. Smoke still hung heavy in the air over lower Manhattan. Sirens wailed in every direction as exhausted emergency crews sifted through the ruins of the Twin Towers. The city was gripped by an almost suffocating sense of fear, disbelief, and chaos. But while millions of eyes were fixed on the tragedy unfolding on their television screens, another death was about to occur, one that would be almost entirely forgotten. 46-year-old Henryk Siwiak had arrived in New York less than a year earlier. Born in Krakow, Poland, he had once worked as a respected construction engineer. But in 2000, he made the difficult decision to leave his wife and 2 children behind. Chasing the promise of a better life in America, he hoped to earn enough to support his family and build a future for them. The language barrier proved to be a formidable obstacle, making it nearly impossible to find work in his specialized field. But Henryk was a determined man, not easily discouraged. By the fall of 2001, he had settled into a small apartment in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood of Brooklyn, sharing the space with another Polish immigrant, just trying to make ends meet. On the morning of September 11th, Henryk, like the rest of the city and the world, was stunned by the attacks. His first thought was of his family. He immediately called his wife in Poland to reassure her that he was safe. Later that day, with public transportation completely shut down and most businesses closed, he stayed indoors, watching the news like everyone else. But as evening fell, his phone rang. It was a friend, telling him about a temporary job cleaning a grocery store in a different part of Brooklyn. The pay was just $15 an hour. In a city paralyzed by terror, most people wouldn't have dared to venture out. But Henryk desperately needed the money. He decided to go. Shortly before 11 p.m., Henryk left his apartment. He was dressed in camouflage pants and a dark shirt, practical clothes for a night of cleaning. He carried a subway map, his only guide to navigate the unfamiliar streets of Brooklyn. He was trying to find the address of the grocery store located on Albany Avenue. With his limited English, the labyrinth of streets was a significant challenge. The neighborhood he was walking into, particularly the area near Fulton Street, had a reputation for crime and violence. On this night, of all nights, residents were already on edge from the day's terror. They were deeply uneasy and suspicious of anyone they didn't recognize. As Henryk walked through the darkened streets, most of the city remained under a kind of self-imposed lockdown. Police patrols were stretched incredibly thin, with their primary focus on the disaster zone in Manhattan. In the outer boroughs like Brooklyn, calls for help often went unanswered for long stretches of time. Around midnight, residents in the area of Albany Avenue and Decatur Street reported hearing gunshots. When officers finally arrived, they found Henryk lying face down on the sidewalk. He had been shot once directly in the chest. His wallet, still containing a small amount of cash, and his watch were still on him. There was no sign of a robbery. Emergency services rushed him to Kings County Hospital, but it was too late. He was pronounced dead on arrival. He had been less than half a mile from his destination, so close to the job that he hoped would bring him one step closer to his dream. In the sheer confusion of that night, few people even noticed that another killing had taken place. Henryk Siwiak's death was completely overshadowed by the enormity of 9/11. In fact, for that date, the New York Police Department recorded only one homicide, his. Investigators faced immediate and overwhelming challenges. Witnesses were scarce, and communication was strained by language barriers. The sound of gunfire had been reported by a handful of people, but no one saw the shooter. Most importantly, there was no known motive. Was it a robbery gone wrong, even though nothing was taken? Was it mistaken identity, or just a random, senseless act of violence? The timing of the murder, on a night when fear and suspicion were at their absolute peak, left the case shrouded in a thick fog of confusion. The area where Siwiak was killed, the 81st Precinct, had long struggled with violent crime. In 2001 alone, The precinct reported more than a dozen homicides. Police theorized that Henryk may have been tragically mistaken for someone else, or perhaps he stumbled into a confrontation he couldn't understand. His accent, his military-style clothing, and his unfamiliar presence could have drawn unwanted attention in a tense, distrustful neighborhood. Henryk's family in Poland was notified days later. His wife Iwa was devastated beyond words. Their children, then teenagers, had been expecting their father to send money home to support their education. Instead, his body was returned to Krakow for burial. In his homeland, newspapers briefly reported the tragic irony. He had been the only person murdered in New York City on the day of the attacks. He had fled one kind of uncertainty in Poland, only to die in another, far more violent one in America. For detectives, the investigation went cold almost immediately. No weapon was ever recovered. No suspects were ever identified. The crime scene produced very little physical evidence. Even years later, as the city began to heal, no credible leads surfaced. The case file remained open, a frustrating puzzle passed between investigators who could find no answers. Retired officers would later admit that the murder, though tragic, was almost impossible to solve given the state of the city that night. Every available resource, every officer, every piece of equipment was focused on the terrorist attacks, leaving local crimes like this with minimal attention. Henryk Siwiak's case stands out in history for its strange, isolated context. Statistically, he is listed as the sole homicide victim in New York City on September 11, 2001. Thousands of others died that day, victims of a global act of terror, but his death was entirely unrelated. In the city's official records, he occupies a solitary, haunting line. One man whose killing remains unexplained amid the greatest national tragedy of modern times. Years after his death, journalists and amateur investigators revisited the case. They tried to trace his final route using maps and old police reports. Their findings suggested that he had likely wandered several blocks off course. The grocery store he was heading to was on the opposite side of a neighborhood notorious for gang activity. At that late hour, with power outages flickering across the city and tension gripping every street corner, it's believed he may have approached someone for directions. Perhaps his request was met with hostility, his accent misunderstood, his presence seen as a threat. Neighbors who lived nearby later recalled hearing shouts just before the gunfire, but none could identify the voices. Others said they saw a man running from the scene, but their descriptions were vague and inconsistent. Police canvassed the area in the days that followed, but the fear and uncertainty of the post-9/11 atmosphere meant few people were willing to speak openly. In the years since, Henryk Siwiak's murder has remained a haunting footnote to the events of that day. Each anniversary of 9/11, as names are read and memorials are held for the thousands who were lost, his story is rarely, if ever, mentioned. Yet the circumstances of his death capture a moment when New York stood on the edge of chaos. A moment when confusion and fear allowed one man's murder to slip quietly into obscurity. His family continues to remember him as a loving father and a hard-working man who came to America seeking opportunity, only to have his life cut short. For them, the date of his death is a cruel and painful twist of fate. For investigators, it is an open file that serves as a constant reminder of a city so overwhelmed by one tragedy that it couldn't properly address another. The streets where he fell have changed in the years since, but the mystery remains, unsolved and unanswered. More than 2 decades later, the identity of Henryk Siwiak's killer is still unknown. There have been no arrests, no confessions, and no closure for his family. His story endures only in dusty police records and in the faint, lingering echoes of that night. The night a man who had come to build a new life lost it amid the turmoil of one of history's darkest days. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more content like this. Stay safe.